Our speaker tonight is Suzanne Ross, and she will speak about Wicked and her book, The Wicked Truth, When Good People Do Bad Things. We're really glad you're here and hope you're excited about about tonight's event. Uh, but what for some of you who may not know, and I assume most of you do know, let me say something about the organization Theology and Peace. It was founded in 2007 by a group of pastors who joined scholars from the Colloquium on Violence and Religion to bring mimetic theory of Rene Girard to a wider audience of pastors, practitioners, peace and justice activists. Theology and Peace, through a mix of theory and practice, uses Girard's construct of mimetic theory to try to understand how violence affects our world and how the church, big C, can respond to this violence. Over the years, we have also sponsored contributing theologians for Theology and Peace, to include the Reverend Dr. Anthony Bartlett, an Episcopal priest and co-founder of the Bethany Center for Nonviolent Theology and Spirituality, and Dr. Paul Nucherlein, who I saw him pop up, a Lutheran pastor and host of the online Girardian lectionary site. Our organizations host conferences with well-known speakers, which have included in the past Brian McLaren and Naomi Tutu, the daughter of South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I just want to go over our plenary speakers for this year's conference included the Reverend James Allison, a well-known Girardian theologian, Pastor Adam Erickson of Clackamas United Church of Christ and the executive director of the Raven Foundation and a budding podcaster himself, and the Reverend Dr. Julia Robinson Moore, who is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and who facilitates racial reconciliation between community groups by implementing an approach grounded in transformational love. Obviously, if you're on here, you can certainly ask any of us for additional information about our organization and plans for the future. So Suzanne, I assume you're ready for an introduction. And I'm going to do that. Okay, good.
I'm ready. I didn't know how to unmute myself, so good.
Okay. So Suzanne is a co-founder and executive director of unRival. Her background in education informs her approach to guiding the organization's vision for peacekeeping. Suzanne remembers reading Anna Karenina in high school and being inspired by the way Tolstoy explored human nature in a non-sentimental way that still left room for redemption and hope. Her interest in the conditions and experiences that impact human formation led her to launch programs and teach in Montessori classrooms, Sunday schools, and in corporate settings. She also co-founded the Raven Foundation, an online community for those seeking to connect to nonviolent Christian theology. An author and playwright, Suzanne believes that the stories we share through the arts preserve heritage, educate future generations, and inspire change due to the invitational nature of narrative. She is the author of The Wicked Truth, When Good People Do Bad Things, and her articles have appeared in the scholarly journal Contagion and online at Sojourners and Pathos. She has led post-show discussions at Chicago theaters and is currently writing a play based on the life of Maria Montessori called The Miracle of San Lorenzo. In her non-rivalry, according to Suzanne, far from requiring the sublimation of human nature, calls instead for it to rise to the challenge of co-creation with others. It is primarily a matter of transformation, not restraint. So, without further ado, Suzanne, please, we look forward to hearing you.
Thanks, Ellen. And it's great to see everybody. I am delighted to be here. Virtually, I always look forward to hanging out with the Theology and Peace crowd. Some of my favorite people and some of the best discussions I've had have been with this wonderful group of people. And I would so love if all of you would just sort of introduce yourselves in the chat room and just let one another know if you have seen the movie yet, or if you've ever seen the Broadway production, the theatrical production. So just movie, yes, play, yes or no, as you introduce yourselves in the chat, because I am very curious about who's in my audience and what you've seen. Oh, good, Adam. Yes and yes. Good boy. So yeah, so I will, and I see Andrew, thank you for posting the handout. I know that there were just a few things that I wanted you to be able to look at while we were talking. So those things are in the handout, and I hope you have them. And if not, that you can get them in the chat. So I really am delighted to be here to discuss the Broadway musical Wicked. That movie adaptation is just of the first act right now, but when I saw that it was coming out, I just thought it would make a great theology and peace conversation. So I could talk about some of the Girardian themes in the musical, and just sort of talk about what prompted me to write the book, The Wicked Truth, really as an introduction to mimetic theory. So I'm scanning the chat to see how many, there's lots of people who've seen the movie and read Suzanne's book. Okay. Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that. Yeah. So yeah, not everyone has seen the Broadway show, obviously. But yeah, if you get a chance to see the movie, I'm just really glad that the story is becoming available that way, to more people. And really, I am not going to offer a review of the movie tonight. I'm going to leave that to Andrew. It's going to be a fun conversation to have among friends, especially if you want to compare the movie to the play. But that's not what I'm going to do tonight. I'm not a movie reviewer, but I would like to talk about the theme of scapegoating in the show and how the show handles it, and give you a little taste of what's covered in my book, but also a little something that's not in the book. I have been thinking about it since 2007 when I published the book. So more thoughts have come to me, but I thought also a little deeper look for those of you who are already well steeped into mimetic theory. It might be fun to try something a little more than what's in the book. So what I want to do tonight is really, I'm going to give a little introduction about the problem of violence and how it's handled in Wicked in a way that allows us to see a path towards a more peaceful future, one that Christ opened up for us. And as Renee says, it's there in front of us if we choose to take it. The world will be a better place. Then we'll have a few minutes of centering prayer, which is on your handout. And then I'm going to look at scapegoating in the musical in three movements. We're going to look at how Dr. Dillamond, the talking goat professor at Shiz, defines scapegoating, and we'll let his conversation guide us. And then we're going to look at two songs, No One Mourns the Wicked, where we're going to examine the interesting phenomenon of the guilty scapegoat. And then we're going to look at the song, What Is This Feeling, to show and examine how scapegoating is an intrinsic part of mimetic rivalry. And then, with any luck, I will have a fabulous conclusion for you, which will hopefully wrap things up and launch a lively conversation. So let's jump in. I wasn't really expecting much when I went to see the musical for the first time in 2005. I certainly wasn't expecting a theatrical exploration of scapegoating and rivalry. But the opening words, sung by the witches' flying monkeys, they're in your handout. They're the words that open the show. Good news, she's dead. I thought, wow, Well, that could be something you might hear sung after a successful sacrifice. Something Herod and Pilate might have said to each other, "Good news, the troublemaker is dead." So I couldn't help but wonder if it was an intentional reversal of the gospel proclamation, "Good news, he lives." And those were my thoughts only after the first two words of the show. When I spoke with Stephen Schwartz, the composer and lyricist, he said that he had not been informed by mimetic theory at all, but he was delighted that I saw the themes of rivalry and scapegoating in the show that he wanted to explore. So Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holzman, who wrote the book, that's the book are the words that aren't sung in a musical. They were inspired by the Gregory Maguire novel, Wicked, I think it's the life and times of the Wicked Witch of the West or something like that. But Maguire gave the character of the Wicked Witch of the West from the Wizard of Oz books a backstory and a name, Elphaba, and allowed her to be more three-dimensional than just a paragon of wickedness. Schwartz and Holzman opened the show with a song celebrating her death, much as the Munchkins sing a song celebrating the death of her wicked sister by falling house in the 1939 movie. For the musical version, Schwartz and Holzman developed characters and a plot that reveal the lie behind scapegoating and how it allows good people to justify violence, which of course is a central insight of mimetic theory. I'd like to focus on how the theatrical version gives us a fun and lighthearted way to discuss the serious topic of scapegoating and allows us to see a way beyond it. There is amazing music, there are lyrics and vocal performances which are a delight, and there is even a talking goat who gives a lesson about how and why the search for a scapegoat happens. We don't have time to review the entire show or even the first act in the movie, but by looking at a lesson from Dr. Dillamond and two songs from the first act, we'll be able to approach scapegoating gently and discover insights that might not have been available to us otherwise. The subtitle of my book and the title for the talk tonight raises an interesting question, well, to me anyway. How is it that good people end up doing bad things? Because one of the worst things we can do, something that would call into doubt our sense of ourselves as good people, is to justify violence against innocent people, what we call scapegoating violence. One of the premises of my book is that most bad things happen when we cling so desperately to our goodness that we can commit horrible acts of violence without ever doubting that we are good people. A valuable insight from parenting, psychology, restorative justice, and peace-building circles is that a deed, whether good or bad, does not represent some intrinsic quality of the person. We are not defined by the worst thing or the best thing we have ever done. The interplay between a person with a particular history and a set of experiences with events and circumstances in their lives is not deterministic and can lead to a variety of outcomes. In other words, change is possible. We can all agree with Alexander Solzhenitsyn that the line between good and evil falls down the middle of each of us. Yet we continue to cling to an unexamined belief in our own goodness, one that relocates that dividing line to a position external to us, somewhere between us, the good guys, and others who become our wicked witches. And then those categories become rigid and resistant to change, as if to do so would threaten our survival. I believe that the reason violence persists, despite the almost universal longing for a world without violence, is because not only have we divided ourselves up into good people and bad people, but we've done the same thing with violence. When we long for an end to violence, we almost always mean an end to the violence of our enemies, the violence directed at us. It is only the saints and prophets among us who humbly confess that all violence is to be condemned, even their own. To end violence, I believe we will have to end the practice of moralizing about it, and to recognize that the distinction between good and bad people and good and bad violence is a false one, a difference without any meaning. So to take a baby step in that direction tonight, I'd like us to explore some nuances of scapegoating without moralizing about it, without doing that good bad thing. That is especially hard to do when talking about scapegoating because it is, without a doubt, evil, and no good person would willingly participate in it. But I'd like us to restrain our reflex to judge the good from the wicked, at least till the end of our time together. If we rush too quickly to assign blame or define goodness, it becomes more likely that we will make mistakes, that we will be afraid of the wrong things and seek to punish the wrong people. If we approach scapegoating as a moral issue that only bad people do, we are very likely to find ourselves in the predicament the Apostle Paul so poignantly described. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. In our desire to end scapegoating, we may find ourselves becoming scapegoaters, a situation very difficult to see clearly because, as Renee taught us, having a scapegoat means not knowing that we have one. But I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. What I am not saying is that we should give up trying to locate evil or being good people. We can and must learn to recognize evil. But if by definition, scapegoaters do not know they are doing something evil, how does it advance the cause of peace to condemn them? Someone engaged in scapegoating believes without a doubt that they are eliminating a real threat to peace and security, and that unless they act, innocent people will suffer. If we accuse them of being a threat to peace because they are justifying the use of violence, a good point, they will most likely become defensive and write us off as delusional or naive. Of course, a benefit accrues to us when we accuse them of scapegoating. It bolsters our sense of righteousness. Like the Pharisees who insist they would never have stoned the prophets, we cannot see how alike we are to the people we are condemning. The problem of how to end scapegoating is really a problem of belief that evil must be located and eliminated through violence, a belief all too common among the good and the wicked alike. Now, the musical Wicked frames this belief in the form of a story and asks it this way. I'm sure you've heard the tagline for the trailer. Are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? Now, many of you will hear that as a brilliant anti-scapegoating question, because it casts doubt on our conviction that we have, without a doubt, located the cause of all our fears. That certainty is the enemy of peace. Passing judgment on whose death is necessary for the good of the community is tricky business. Even Jesus didn't take it on. He said he came not to judge the world. If anyone hears my words, he told us, but does not keep them, I do not judge that person, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. What Jesus is trying to tell us is that if anyone hears and understands what scapegoating is, how much harm it does, and how very wrong it is, yet becomes a scapegoater, well, that is who Jesus came to save. That's you and me as we try to follow Christ. Girard said, Christian conversion is our discovery that we are scapegoaters without knowing it. The musical asks us to redefine what and where evil is, and inevitably what it means to be good. The subtitle of my book, When Good People Do Bad Things, does seem like an oxymoron, but we're going to allow Wicked to reveal how important it is for good people to confess doing bad things if we truly desire an end to violence. So before we get any deeper into all that, I'd like us to take a few minutes to nudge ourselves out of our judging brain for just 2 minutes, maybe it'll take us. We're going to just take a moment for a centering prayer that invites us to get out of that dividing the world up into the good and the evil and into a place of oneness in Christ. So your handout has the words on it that it's for the contemplating of the Christ mystery. We're all muted except for me, so you can speak the words out loud with me or just listen, close your eyes. I really encourage you to do the inhaling and exhaling as we say the words together, but just get in a relaxed position and close your eyes if that's comfortable, or keep them open to read the words. And we'll start just with an inhale and an exhale. Christ in me in Christ, Christ in all is well. Christ in me in Christ, Christ in all is one. Christ in me in Christ, Christ in all is Christ. All is Christ. All is one. All is well in Christ. Well, thank you for doing that with me. I appreciate the quiet moment. So let's try and return to this discussion of scapegoating without moralizing, without judgment, if we can. And we'll begin by looking at the elements that make up a scapegoating event. Now, we all know what they are. There's a community in crisis, a fearful and angry mob, and the expulsion of or violence against an innocent victim. If a community is experiencing fear, confusion, natural or man-made disasters, internal conflict of any kind, the search for a cause generates a lot of potential culprits. If one of the accusations gathers enough followers, the community converges on a single victim and discharges their violence against him, providing a cathartic release of the tensions that have been threatening to tear the community apart. We're all familiar with that analysis of scapegoating. And we also know that to be effective, the scapegoated victim must be silenced or so discredited that his protests of innocence do not mar the unanimity of the gathered community. In the musical, there is a classroom scene at Shiz University taught by a professor who gives an example of a community in search of a scapegoat. He happens to be a talking goat, and he gives a lesson in how and why scapegoating happens. I'm going to read the dialogue between Dr. Dillamond, the professor, the goat, and Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, who is a student at Shiz. And this is dialogue from the musical. So it's a Dr. Dillamond is an animal with a capital A. There's a variety of animals that can talk in Oz, and they're animals with a capital A, but they're losing their power of speech. And this is what Dr. Dillamond says to his class. Doubtless you've noticed I am the sole animal on the faculty, the token goat, as it were. But it wasn't always this way. Oh, dear students, how do I put this? How I wish you could have known this place as it once was, when one would walk down these halls and hear an antelope explicating a sonnet, a snow leopard solving an equation, a wildebeest waxing philosophic. Can you see, students, what's being lost? How our dear Oz is becoming less and less, well, colorful? Now, what set this in motion? Elphaba raises her hand and says, from what I've heard, it began with the Great Drought. And Dillamond says, exactly, precisely. Food grew scarce, and people grew hungrier and angrier. And the question became, whom can we blame? Can anyone tell me what is meant by the term scapegoat? Now that's the dialogue from the stage play. But unfortunately, in the movie version, Dr. Dillamond does not ask that question. I was very disappointed. I was waiting for it eagerly, but it didn't happen. So no one actually says the word scapegoat in the movie, and I think that's a terrible loss. That's the whole of my movie review that you'll get from me tonight. But while Dr. Dillamond gives an accurate picture of the classic understanding of scapegoating, we can recognize it is one that is prone to moralizing. It allows us to believe that we, good people, would never do such a thing because, after all, false accusations are bad, something good people wouldn't do. Only bad people blame innocent people for problems within their community. So I was delighted when I heard one of my favorite Girardian scholars, Mark Anspach, deliver a paper at the 2023 Cover Conference in Paris, celebrating the centennial of René Girard's birth. Mark is an anthropologist and social theorist, and he offered an analysis of scapegoating that punctures a gaping hole in our desperate attempts to be good by insisting on how different our violence is from that of our enemies and rivals. Mark skillfully demonstrated that scapegoating is a function of mimetic rivalries, and it is what allows us to be violent and hold on to our goodness at the same time. Before we look at the quote from Mark in your handout, let's be sure we understand mimetic rivalry. I think most of you could give a better definition than I'm going to give right now, but just want to put it all out there on the table here. So a mimetic rivalry happens when rivals imitate one another's desire, yet believe that their desire is original and only their rival is imitating them, and willfully and maliciously, as a matter of fact, in order to ruin their life. But the more one rival desires something, whether a lover, a prestigious prize, or piece of territory, the more the other rival's desire grows, producing a mutual blindness to how intensely interdependent their desires have become. And if anyone dares suggest that the rivals are becoming more and more alike than they might realize, tantrums and protests of absolute difference will ensue. So here's what Mark said about rivalry. It's in your handout. I wanted you to be able to look at it with me. Each party sees half the truth, the half that applies to the other. To speak the truth about the other's role in a dispute without recognizing that the same truth applies to ourselves amounts to scapegoating the other. It amounts to scapegoating the other even if the other is guilty as charged. Now, Mark is highlighting two nuances of scapegoating, things that make it very difficult to see in ourselves and therefore difficult to put an end to. Well, anyway, scapegoats can be guilty, and scapegoating is a feature of mimetic rivalry. Now, these aspects of scapegoating are woven so tightly together that it's sometimes hard to tease apart, which is why we're going to look at these two songs together, which will help us. No One Mourns the Wicked can illuminate the concept of the guilty scapegoat. And what is this feeling? The song sung by Elphaba and Galinda together shows how scapegoating is part of rivalry. And then, well, we'll look at those songs, and then I'll conclude, hopefully, with some suggestions of how we can move forward. So we're also going to take some time to talk amongst ourselves in some breakout rooms in a minute. So let me introduce that. As I said, evil exists, violence exists. People and situations that are harmful to us are quite real. No One Mourns the Wicked, the song that opens the show, puts that conviction to music as the flying monkeys sing the lyrics, and that's also on your handout. The opening song is "Good News, She's Dead. The Witch of the West is dead, the wickedest witch there ever was. The enemy of all of us here in Oz is dead. Good news, good news." So the monkeys, the Ozians singing the song, are singing about how good it is to celebrate someone's death if they are evil, of course. It's good to celebrate a death when they're a threat to everyone in Oz. Of course, within rivalries, accusations like that proliferate. And so the challenge is for us to be able to tell the difference between a false accusation and one to pay attention to. In other words, when is it okay to celebrate, and when is a death something we should mourn? So I'd like us to get into this conversation by having some small group discussions about the 1939 movie. First of all, when you come into your groups, please share if you haven't seen the movie with Judy Garland. I have encountered many people who haven't seen it, so it's okay to admit it's fine. But if you haven't seen it, the other folks in the room can help you if the plot is unfamiliar to you. But what I'd like you to do is, Andrew's going to post some of the questions for the conversation in the chat. There they are. So when you get into your breakout rooms, the first thing I'd like you to talk about is when Dorothy kills the Wicked Witch of the West with a bucket of water. If you saw the movie, did you cheer the death? And can you describe how you felt when Dorothy was given the witch's broomstick by the witch's minions, the monkeys? And then the second question, what did you think when you learned that Dorothy and her friends already had what their hearts desired? Did it dampen your ability to celebrate the witch's death? If anyone would like to share either the first question or the second question or anything that came up in your group about, the way we experienced that death and the celebration around it, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, we were in agreement that none of us cheered the death of the witch. I think our sentiment was that scene was pretty horrifying. Certainly for me, when I first watched it as a child, there's a sense of relief that Dorothy is out of danger.
Yeah.
But no cheering of the death of the witch. And I think the second question concerns. I mean, Suzanne, can you restate the second question?
Yes, the second question is, how did you feel when you heard that Dorothy and her friends already had everything they desired?
But then there was a follow-up question to that, right? About,
well, did it dampen your ability to celebrate killing someone?
yeah,
Killing
yeah.
witch? Yeah.
Yeah, well, since we weren't in a particularly celebratory mood about the death of the witch, it did not dampen
Mm,
that. Um, and I think we all thought that was kind of an interesting twist in the story. I mean, my thought was that there's a kind of moral lesson there, which is, they had what they wanted inside themselves, but before they could discover that, they had to go on this quest where they were really tested, right? And then they
mm,
found out, through that succession of tests that
yeah.
that they really had what they wanted all along, something like that, which
Right.
I guess is meant to be an edifying lesson. Um, but no, no, it didn't have anything. The death of the witch didn't have a dampening effect.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Um, anyone else in agreement or a different take on it?
It, Suzanne in our group, which included Rebecca and I think Amy. Well, at least I said I celebrate. I was a kid. I haven't seen these movies since I was a kid. I did
Yeah.
celebrate the death, and we had a different take on it, and that in many ways, the throwing of the water, we don't remember it as being particularly deliberate or intentional with the purpose of killing the witch. It was more just that word defensive came up. It was a response Dorothy had to the situation, and that uh, in many ways, while perhaps for me terrifying, watching the witch melt um, was a bit satisfying after having been portrayed as mean. I'll get you, my little pretty, and I'll
Mhm,
get your dog too. Um,
mhm.
and that in the end, it was so easy to defeat this powerful force that throughout this movie had seemed to be um, unable to defeat her, that had total power. Yeah. So that's kind of the comments we heard.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, she was portrayed as so terribly wicked, and it was kind of surprising at the end that it was just a bucket of water that could do her in. That I celebrated that part. I was like, oh, great, it was easy. We could get rid of her so easy. Um, anyone else want to share their reactions to that movie? If you were like me, I've watched it over and over and over and over again. So I watched it with my kids so often I could just basically tell you when the camera angle was going to switch and when the close-up was coming and all of that. So Curtis.
Yeah, we just watched it before going to see the film.
Yeah.
And number one, I'd forgotten they were even sent to get the broomstick. I didn't even remember about the broomstick. It was kind of funny. And then I just was struck again, and that just how accidental the death seemed with the water. She's just trying to put out the fire, and in a way that connects. We said in our group that with the second question um, it, it sort of made sense that the um, discovering that they already had what they desired was more of it didn't depend on magic. This is sort of a lesson in character or something.
Mhm.
And it's interesting then that I don't know, somehow that connects in my mind with the death of the witch being just because of this accident of I mean, it is something magical that happens because she melts when she's in contact with water, but that it's not it's not a battle of magical wits or something that kills her.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But so interesting. Okay, I have time for one more comment. Any other group
I
count?
put my hand up. I was group 4. And I had
Karen, okay.
Martin Hegseth and I can't remember the other woman that was in the group. She was listening, which was fine. I don't think that any of us had any huge reactions one way or another. my own huge reaction was more to the monkeys. The monkeys were what terrified me. And even though the witch was dead, the monkeys were still there. And so, I think we were all a bit relieved when the witch was extinguished. And I don't know. I think that they had I'm adding to what we talked about, but I think the discovery that they had everything they needed already, that was in a way kind of a letdown.
Mm. Mhm.
Although they had to go on that journey to discover it for themselves, it just seemed like a letdown.
Mhm.
But then, then she wakes up and she sees all these. The only person that doesn't show up again is Elvira Gulch. Elvira Gulch doesn't show up again. All the other main characters do.
Oh, good point.
And so, yeah.
Well,
Even Toto, who was supposed to be destroyed, was there. So
there.
I always wondered if Toto would still meet his fate because she was still back. But anyway, yeah. So.
Oh, yes, there's so many questions. Yes, thank you for sharing those. And for letting yourself get back into the space of the movie, the impact of that movie on you. I really appreciate what you've all pointed out is sort of some of the letdown of it, and even though when the wizard tells Dorothy and her friends to get the broom, they I think it's the lion that says, but we'll have to kill her to get it, or I forget who says it. Somebody says it, and they just, okay, yeah, I guess we'll have to kill her. And the fact that the killing happens accidentally, and that we buy that version of it it's to me very interesting. I think that the way I look at the movie, the 1939 movie, is really as a well-told mythological story. A myth distorts, a myth. What did Girard tell us? A myth is actually recounting something that actually happened, but it's from the point of view of the victors of an act of violence. And so when the story gets told, the victors are innocent. It was an accident that she died. We didn't mean to kill her, but we needed that because of was necessary to kill her. Otherwise, we couldn't get home. We couldn't have a heart, or and then, but yet the movie undermines itself. It messes up the myth a little bit by revealing that the necessity of killing her was a fabrication. The whole mythological justification for her death was a lie. And so it reveals that that both the innocence and the wickedness are fabricated. It's just not true. Although what is true is someone died and someone was killed for something that was it was justified as necessary, but it was not necessary at all. And to me, that's the hallmark of a really well-told myth, that we don't question the necessity. And so what I think what I'm asking us to do as we're looking at this as a scapegoating narrative is to really be honest that evil does exist, that there are risks and dangers and horrible things can happen to us, but how do we learn to tell the difference about what's truly evil and where there's a misunderstanding, where the whole story hasn't been told yet, right? So what the musical does is tell us the full story, the story of Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, whose version of things was silenced so that the myth could be carry on, and nobody could doubt their goodness. Dorothy and her three friends believe in their innocence and their goodness right up through the end, right? So I think it's safe to say that the witch does function as a scapegoat for the Ozians, because what the musical reveals, and what you'll see in the movie part 2 when it comes out next year, is that what was going on was a political rivalry between the wizard and Elphaba and the Wicked Witch. And they were vying for political power in Oz, and that they were rivals. And so when we understand that the story of her wickedness was part of a power play on the part of the wizard, it becomes almost impossible then to celebrate her death or to see it as necessary, or to see her as any different than the wizard. The wizard isn't as good as we thought. The witch isn't as bad. We're not as safe as we thought we were once she was destroyed. But the witch, no doubt, is not completely innocent, because as we know, she vows to kill Dorothy to get the shoes off her feet. And I'm sure she was not the most perfect human being, and that she did terrorize the Munchkins and so forth. So even though the witch and the wizard are political rivals, neither one of them is innocent, and both are guilty. And so, but neither one is fully responsible for the problem. So I think even if the witch can be portrayed as someone who maybe is a threat in some ways and did want to kill Dorothy, she still is not responsible for the rivalry. She's not the sole participant in that political rivalry. And so she ends up being a scapegoat. As Mark says, you can still be right about someone, that they're guilty as charged, and still be scapegoating them. So that's that sort of complicated the complication that happens to the myth when we hear the story that was silenced, that was excluded, which is what the musical tells us. I'm going to go quickly to
Suzanne,
yes.
You'd asked me to ask if there's one clarification when you are referring to the witch, because many people haven't seen the Broadway play in second half. Are you referring to Elphaba?
Yes.
Okay, I think that helps. Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yes, Elphaba. The Wicked Witch is Elphaba. I know Glinda's a witch too, but yeah, I'm referring to Elphaba. Thank you for that. Yes, so let us look at the song the two girls sing, which really gets us to look at mimetic rivalry and see how scapegoating is part of that dynamic. So the two girls, I think, let me just yeah, here we go. Yeah, I'm trying to see where I'm picking up. So we do all have a need to be safe, to be free from harm. And so we do need to learn when there is a real threat and when it's just a manufactured story. But within rivalries, accusations are flying constantly. Everyone's pointing the finger at everyone else as to who the threat is. So the girls sing a song which just demonstrates this beautifully. I think it's one of the most popular songs in the show, next to popular. But it's What Is This Feeling, which is on your handout. And I asked Ellen to help me read it together because it's a duet. So the two girls, if you haven't seen the show yet, the two girls that are at the center of the story are Galinda who arrives at the university already set on becoming a sorcerer. And she wants to be in this class taught by Madame Morrible, but she's immediately rebuffed by Madame Morrible as unworthy. And Elphaba arrives with a desire she hasn't dared give voice to yet, to be accepted for who she is, despite her green skin. Madame Morrible, though, quickly realizes Elphaba has the gift for sorcery and takes her on as a student, but not Glinda. And that immediately sets them on a course of rivalry. They each now want to be a sorcerer, and they want to be the best, and they want to get there first. So this is classic mimetic rivalry. They're inflaming each other's desires. Each is a model for the other, as well as obstacles to achieving it. And so the song illustrates this this scapegoating element that's part of rivalry. So Ellen, let's read it. We'll just alternate here. I'll be Elphaba and Ellen will be Galinda.
Okay, and you're going to start the both.
I will start. So, yes, they're writing letters to their parents. That's what this song is about. Yes, there's been some confusion, for you see, my roommate is
Unusually and exceedingly peculiar, and altogether quite impossible to describe.
blonde.
What is this feeling so sudden and new?
I felt the moment I laid eyes on you.
My pulse is rushing.
My head is reeling.
My face is flushing.
What
What
is
is, oh, you were going to, sorry, go
What
ahead.
is this feeling? Fervid as a flame. Does it have a name? Yes. Loathing.
Go ahead.
Unadulterated loathing. Sing along.
For your face,
Your voice.
your clothing,
Let's just say I loathe it all. Every little trait, however small.
makes my very flesh begin to crawl with simple, utter loathing.
There's a strange exhilaration in such total detestation. It's so pure, so strong.
Though I admit it came on fast, still I do believe that it can last.
And I will be loathing, loathing you my whole life long. Stephen Schwartz said that when he was thinking about this song, he researched love songs from musicals and used love songs as a model for this this song, which I thought was just quite brilliant, because hate and love are not opposites. They're intimate involvement of two people with each other. So each of the girls is justifying their hatred and blaming it on the other one for some, qualities that they think, well, everyone would see they're hateful anyway. But unfortunately, really, what's the thing I want us to clue in on is that exhilaration that comes from loathing, how we really can boost our sense of being good people by knowing who the bad guys are. And we can take a perverse delight in letting others know how wrong they are while reassuring ourselves that we're nothing like them. So the difference between us is undeniable, even though there's no difference at all. So just to return to Mark's comment again, to speak the truth about the other's role in a dispute without recognizing that the same truth applies to ourselves amounts to scapegoating the other. It amounts to scapegoating the other, even if the other is guilty as charged. So when we deny our role in conflicts and rivalries, we are scapegoating our rival as surely as our rival is scapegoating us. Mark rightly observes that conflicts intensify through mutual imitation. They tend to move toward greater reciprocity and symmetry. And though we're not used to thinking of it this way, our conflicts may have intensified to a case of mutual, reciprocal, symmetrical scapegoating. Perhaps the hallmark of goodness is not that we never do something bad, but that we're not too ashamed to admit it to ourselves and our rivals. So I'm going to wrap up here with just another look at the first song, the opening song, where the Ozians are celebrating the death of Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West. But the lyrics point us in a new direction for what it means to be good enough to nurture hope in a future without violence. As the Ozians celebrate the witch's murder at the hands of Dorothy and her friends, they justify their celebration as the normal behavior of good people. They sing, "No one mourns the wicked. No one cries they won't return. No one lays a lily on their grave. The good man scorns the wicked. Through their lives, our children learn what we miss when we misbehave." So they're singing that this is the way we're taught to behave when a wicked person meets their deserved end. Their celebration of her death serves as a warning to everyone that if you want to be accepted, to have secure belonging in the community, and have our protection and love, you had better show your solidarity by joining in the celebration. But we can see how celebrating a death may be an act of scapegoating, one that conceals our complicity in the feelings of fear and anxiety that plague our community. In her marvelous book, The Force of Nonviolence, Judith Butler suggests a different response to the death of the wicked, one that challenges the false difference between good and bad people, good and bad violence. Instead of the refrain, "No one mourns the wicked," Butler implores us to see every life as grievable. In other words, there is no life lost that can be celebrated. She calls this a demographic precondition for an ethics of nonviolence that makes no exception. It is a move beyond moralizing about wickedness, violence, and death to a universal ethic of the value and grievability of each and every human life. So that chorus of good news, of course, is also an echo of the gospel. Gospel means good news, but the good news is not that Jesus is dead, but that Jesus lives. The one thing a victim cannot do if the scapegoating is to be effective. Jesus was the target of accusations of treason and blasphemy, and the people who killed him believed he was guilty as charged. They celebrated his death, but for an interminable weekend, his friends and followers believed that this was the end of his story and that they were in danger from the authorities if recognized as his friends. But the good news arrived on Easter Sunday that death was not to have the final word, that Jesus' story would not be silenced, but shared and proclaimed throughout the world. The resurrection complicates our celebrations, asking us to resist celebrating and mourn the wicked instead, lest we end up believing false accusations and crucifying a child of God. So in conclusion, let me just say this. If that happens, if you find yourself doing the very thing you hate, don't despair. I'll leave you with the words of Jesus that I shared earlier. If anyone hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge the world, for I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. Christ lives, and through him we are forgiven. Let us grieve every death and mourn the wicked as fully as we mourn our loved ones. Thank you for listening tonight and being such a good audience, and God bless you all.
Wow, thank you, Suzanne. It's just remarkable the amount of time and the energy that you have spent bringing Girard to life through the movie, and the movie bringing him to life without knowing about him.
Yeah, I was so surprised.
I watched your interview of Frank Schwartz, and that's so fascinating. If people have some questions of Suzanne, first of all, I highly recommend reading Suzanne's book. because it explores some of these topics more in depth, and it really is insightful, not just about the play, but also about life, right? About how we operate in life and how we might help. So I think your book, even I've been trying to do some inner reflection as a result of your book, and trying to understand, even where I stand on things. So if you have a question, I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat, and let's go to there. Got a lot of people saying thanks, including Adam and Paul. I'm waiting to see if anybody puts a question in the chat. I have a question while we're waiting, and it's simply, obviously you felt very powerfully about the play. What really prompted you to, you do a lot of very in-depth thinking about different aspects of the play. What prompted you to write the book? What were you hoping to get out of it, perhaps, and your audience?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I was, I'm a teacher. It's not something you do, it's something you are, I think. And so I was just so profoundly influenced by the scholars doing mimetic theory. And I also, I guess, am a student as well, is that I didn't mind picking up these books and reading them, and that were totally out of my depth, theology and philosophy and literature and all these brilliant books. And it just took me so long to understand it. But I was just so motivated because I knew there was some truth in this, and something that, as you said, Ellen, it causes you to self-reflect. It causes you to think about yourself differently and challenge your sense of your own goodness. And so when I saw the musical, I thought, this is someone put Girardian theory to music. It made it accessible. And so I thought, maybe that's what I could do, to make it easier, but not easy in the sense of not as rigorous, but just, so you don't have to have a PhD in philosophy, or know who Hegel is. Oh my God, that took me a long time to figure out. So in order to get these things, which are just basic things about human life and human experience. And so when the play opened, Keith were seeing, and I, after that first song, I elbowed him and I said, if this thing goes where this first song is saying it might go, I'm writing a book about it. That was after the first one. And it did. It beautifully unmasked the whole mythological telling of the story of the witch and her death and the necessity of it. And so when I saw the way it ended, I was like, oh God, all right, I guess I'm writing a book.
Yeah,
that's why.
Well, and I think I love that, to be able to see it in contemporary, more accessible ways, because it does get bogged down sometimes. Even if I tell friends, I did this thesis on Girard, or you try it, they get lost very quickly.
Well, yeah, and it's fair. It's fine. It's normal. I mean, and even the scholars themselves, when I got involved in the Raven Foundation and doing things like that, it was at their request, because they said, look, what we're doing here is too important to leave it in a PhD seminar. It's got to get outside the ivy walls. And if you're interested in doing that, go for it.
Right.
So, and
Right.
they nurtured me and helped me along with it. So it's great.
Good. Just gonna George, thanks you for writing an excellent book and maybe using it in a course he teaches in China. I think he said in the summer. I didn't quite get that, or our summer. Mary Jane asks, thanks, Suzanne, how do we work with communities to consider our complicity in the suffering of others?
Gently. I thank you, Mary Jane. I mean, that is such a challenge. So if you're referring to within your communities, you know, where you are in your hometown or your church, or where you're gathering with folks, it's very hard to raise awareness about your complicity in other people's suffering. Is very hard without generating defensiveness and hurt feelings. And so I think the best approach to take is to do it kind of sideways or through a third object, a piece of art, through music, through a musical, through a story, through looking at fairy tales. In part of my book, I look at fairy tales and ask people to imagine a backstory for the villains in the fairy tales. So I think the best way to approach these difficult subjects is through art, music, inviting people to reflect together through story, and let them make their own discoveries. Because accusations, or, you know, any sense that you've got the truth and you know what's going on, and then is going to trigger that's that feeling of being attacked, you know, and so you don't want to do that. So I hope that's helpful, but yeah, I would say use story, use the arts, use a shared experience that the community can have together, and explore something together that way.
Okay, George asks, how can we within the Girardian community learn to recognize our similarities with each other, including those we revile as rival claimants to Girard's legacy, so we can move beyond accusation to real dialogue and realize that each party only sees half the truth? Okay.
I get
he's
it. I
Okay.
get it. Yeah, I love that question, George. I ponder it myself a lot. I can tell you that it was the second cover conference I went to, and I won't name names, but there were some first generation Girardians that went at each other in a plenary session. And afterwards, I will name this name. I went to Sandy Goodhart. Many of you know Sandy. He was moderating that session. And I went to Sandy and I said, what the heck happened, Sandy? These are all people who know what scapegoating is. And I just saw it play out. And he goes, well, just because we're scholars of scapegoating doesn't mean we're not going to do it. And that's the definition of it. You don't know you're doing it. If you have a scapegoat, you don't know you have one. And so, George, I think that the Girardian community needs to do some soul searching. I too am not sure about how we can, you know, stop holding so tightly to the truth, or in a defensive way of what we think is the right interpretation of things, and who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. I don't know. I feel like I just feel like the way I personally handle it is I don't engage with the conflict. I just do my work. And if you don't agree with me, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not going to try and talk you into anything. This is what I'm doing. Take it or leave it. And I think that's sort of the best. Instead of being defensive, I think you point that out very well, George, that instead of being defensive and staking out territory, let's let go of that.
We have a good conversation going on here, but some of the, if I were to gather, it's two things about the original book. Did any of your research involve reading the original Frank Baum story?
Yeah.
And one person says that it looked more intentional, the killing by Dorothy of the Wicked Witch, than it does in the 1939 film. And just to throw this in here, another person, which I had no idea, reminds us that the original book was a political parable about the populist movements in the 1890s.
Yeah.
So maybe you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, no, you're absolutely spot on. All of that.
Not me.
Yeah,
Those people.
whoever made those comments is spot on. The book, the contradiction between what the characters say and what they do is made very explicit in the book, in the Baum book. It is just, you can't ignore the fact that, it's like someone is saying, I sing beautifully, and then they croak like a frog. I don't remember the things exactly, but nobody's actions match their words. And so the lies, you can't ignore it. And the political struggles and that the Dorothy is not an innocent, sweet little thing from Kansas in the Baum book. She is just there's a scene between her and the Wicked Witch of the West in which the two of them are just going at each other in the Baum novel. So it's wonderful. I think I read the Baum novel and was shocked at how they got that movie out of that book. It was a totally mythologizing of those characters in the movie, in the 1939 movie. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, we're almost at the end,
Okay.
and I'd like to just thank you so much, Suzanne. This is just, I'm so grateful that you were willing to do this with us. It just is a great evening. I would also like to remind people that we will continue with Mimesis at the Movies in January, in which we will discuss the film Cabrini. And I will do a little movie review. It won't be as good as January Jackson's from November, but I will aspire. It'll be aspirational to do. And she had a lovely review of the movie. I always confuse it with Contact, and I know it's not Contact. So, Suzanne, any parting words? And maybe we can all give her a wave or a shake, or
Yeah, it was. Thank you. No, it was just a delight to see everybody. It makes me now just want to have a cup of coffee with a whole bunch of different people. So I wish we were nearby, but till we meet again in person, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight.